A famous quote by the Dalai Lama says, "I am just a Buddhist monk, no more, no less." Is the Dalai Lama truly just a Buddhist monk, or is his version of the Buddhist religion different than others? The actions and teachings of the Dalai Lamas date back to the year 1587, when the Mongol leader Atla Khan named Besad Nam's Ringa Macha the third hierarch of the Jide Lungspa school of Tibetan Buddhism, commonly called the Yellow Hat sect. He was named the first Dalai Lama. The term Dalai Lama comes from a combination of Tibetan and Mongolian and means ocean of wisdom. The Dalai Lamas are said to be reincarnations of the previous Dalai Lama, and the current Dalai Lama is the 14th such reincarnation that is known of. The Dalai Lamas are believed to be reincarnations of the Buddha of compassion. What is interesting about the Buddha of compassion is that they choose to reincarnate rather than attain nirvana in order to serve the people of the world. In other words, while they have attained Buddhahood, they remain in the cyclical existence in order to serve humankind. In most sects of Buddhism, this would not be the case because when you attain enlightenment, you cannot be reincarnated. However, in this case, the Buddha of compassion choose to come back in order to help better the situation of the people of the world. The idea of the reincarnation of a single being over and over who remembers their previous lives is something singular to Tibetan Buddhism because it makes the Dalai Lama the only example of someone who remembers past lives and has attained enlightenment, yet chooses to come back into the cyclical existence. The current Dalai Lama is the 14th recognized Dalai Lama. He was born July 6, 1935. He was born in the small village of Taktsker in northeastern Tibet to a peasant family. At the age of 2, he was recognized as the reincarnation of his predecessor, the 13th Dalai Lama. The highest lamas in Tibet had to search for him using a vision that told where his house would be and a series of tests to prove that he was indeed the reincarnation of the previous Dalai Lama. These tests included holding out a string of beads belonging to the 13th Dalai Lama, which the new Dalai Lama immediately claimed to own. The Dalai Lama's education began at the age of 6, after his enthronement ceremony, and was completed at the age of 24. He was examined on logic, metaphysics, traditional Buddhist thought, and he debated the middle path in the canon of monastic discipline. Once the Dalai Lama had completed his education, he became responsible for the people of Tibet. At age 16, in the year 1950, he was called upon to take full political control as the head and state of government in Tibet. 80,000 People's Liberation Army soldiers had invaded the country with the intention of liberating it for China. In reality, however, mineral and agricultural resources had been exploited and Tibet has become a settlement area for the Chinese. Because Tibet is largely a Buddhist nation, and Buddhism is traditionally nonviolent, the Dalai Lama was faced with serious difficulties when dealing with Sino-Soviet leaders. In March of 1959, there was a mass uprising against the Chinese army that had assumed an uninvited military presence in Tibet. The Tibetans wished to remain independent of China as they had been in the past. However, the result of this uprising was that Chinese forces killed somewhere around 400,000 Tibetans. The Dalai Lama was forced out of his humble traditional home by the Chinese army, whom threatened his life in 1959. He was welcomed in India, which has since become his home, although he has always wished to travel back to Tibet after the Chinese relinquished their presence. The Dalai Lama is famous for his teaching and peace talks. He's written many books and also spoken all around the world. The Dalai Lama teaches that compassion is the way to happiness and that by giving to others, one makes oneself happy. The Dalai Lama follows many traditional Buddhist teachings in that he practices meditation every day. He does not allow himself to get upset, be unhappy, use drugs of any kind or alcohol. He learned how to quiet the mind, but has had to do this through years of training. It was not an innate ability. He also tells us that happiness is not attained through scientific knowledge, but through forgiveness, tolerance, and compassion. In 1987, he put together a 5-point plan for peace with China. Transformation of the whole of Tibet into a zone of ahasma, demilitarization zone of peace and nonviolence. Abandonment of China's population transfer policy, which threatened the very existence of Tibetans as a people. Respect for the Tibetan people's fundamental human rights and democratic freedoms. Restoration and protection of Tibetans' natural environment, and abandonment of China's use of Tibet for the production of nuclear weapons and dumping of nuclear waste. And finally, commencement of earnest negotiations on the future status of Tibet and of relations between Tibet and Chinese people. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989 for these and other ideas about the future of Tibet. The second part of this is, how do the Dalai Lama's actions make him a Buddhist? And is he really a good Buddhist? The Buddha would not have wanted a monk to be also involved in the political sphere, because the Buddha wanted all of his monks to renounce the world. The Dalai Lama does follow that teaching in that all monks have a robe and a waistcord. However, he also has many other material possessions ranging from glasses to a car. The Dalai Lama claim that he is a simple Buddhist monk is rather far-fetched in that he is much involved in world affairs. He wishes for people to cultivate relationships, and he is in fact attached to material possession. However, while this may have been frowned upon by the Buddha, the Dalai Lama explains that today the world is smaller and more interdependent. One nation's problems can no longer be solved by itself completely. Thus, without a sense of universal responsibility, our very survival becomes threatened. Basically, universal responsibility is a feeling for other people's suffering just as we feel our own. This statement is very untraditional in that it encourages people to go outside their own head and involve themselves in world affairs. It is very different from typical Buddhist teaching in that it says that not all problems can be solved by a personal quest for enlightenment. However, it does follow the traditional Buddhist teaching that the rules may be changed according to one's own experience when the need arises. The Dalai Lama, in being who he is, has, according to Tibetan tradition, chosen to aid mankind rather than attain nirvana himself. Therefore, if he aids in the universal struggle for worldwide peace, then he is fulfilling his duty in making nirvana attainable to others who might have otherwise been caught in conflict. Therefore, even if the Dalai Lama does not exhibit the qualities of a traditional Buddhist monk, he is compassionately helping humanity find the middle way.